John, good evening. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast tonight.
Josh, it's great to be here with you.
Yeah, man, I've been looking forward to catching up with you. It's been a good while. You are the host of the Classic Movie Reviews podcast, and gosh, when was it when you and I decided to do the review of The Princess Bride together? Was that like 4 years ago,
At
something like
least
that?
4 years ago, it was way before the pandemic.
Yeah,
So,
I do remember that. So,
or
which
five
okay,
years ago.
yeah, so that review, where John and I we take an in-depth dive into the film, The Princess Bride, that's out there on YouTube, so everyone can go check that out once they're done listening to this. But just to kind of set the framework for our conversation, John, we're going to be talking about some horror cinema today and also some classic horror cinema. But I kind of want to break down what makes a movie a classic. Are we talking like just time for like how long it's since it's been released? Are we talking like cultural impact, the amount it made at the box office, maybe a combination of all of those? I guess, what criteria do you think makes a film a classic?
Well, I used the same framework from the automobile, at least 25 years old. But to me, it becomes a classic when it's filtered through so many people, so much time, and it still stands out. You don't have to watch all the bad movies to get to the good one because people have done most of that weeding away for you.
Right.
That's kind of how I like to view them.
All right. So now, if we are talking about horror classics here, now here's how I would sort of say like horror has sort of broken down kind of since the early days of film. Like, I mean, we have of course different subgenres within horror. So here's I'll give my sort of timeline, and then I'm curious what your take might be on this too. But I feel like from the 30s up into the 50s, we had like the creature films like Dracula, Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon. And then from the 60s up through like the 80s and 90s, it was kind of like the slasher slash demon sort of thing. You had films like Psycho, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. Then, of course, you had The Exorcist, and then The Omen and things like that. And then once you get into the 2000s, it's a lot of sequels and remakes
Right.
mostly. So please, that's how I've kind of sort of like view them broadly. But what are your thoughts on that? Is there some alignment there?
That sounds pretty right. I don't know if you throw the alien invasion movies into the horror. I kind of
Right.
group them together. Sometimes it's sci-fi, sometimes it's horror. But um, I found a 1910 Frankenstein done by the Edison Company. It was a silent, and it followed the story. It was real short. I did a little review on it. It's only about a 30-minute movie, but they go all the way back into the teens. Nosferatu came out in the 20s. And then that's when you were talking about the classic movies. You got the Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy. They all came out right in the early 30s. And it was going to Hammer bought all those films in the late 50s and 60s and re-released them with Christopher Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. So we got that other set of updated Frankenstein mummies and all that, and then we went into that goes to the 70s, and then after the Omen and a few of the really good ones like you named, we get into that green flashy light, chop them up, and I don't watch any of those, so I'm too scared to fall asleep at night.
Yeah, I was gonna say some of those slashers they do stick with you, and I guess in some ways when you talk about like films that just stick like with culture that people like know and recognize right away. I mean, I guess like some of them do leave that impact of just that, they could be like very gruesome or very scary, especially with slashers. Like, I think I remember, I can't remember what the exact number is, but with the Nightmare on Elm Street, there was like a very considerable amount of like blood used like in that film. There was that one scene in particular where Johnny Depp got like sucked into the bed and then suddenly all the blood like shot out. And so I remember like they used a very considerable amount of fake blood to make that film. And I think it did make people queasy in many ways. But, like I said, but like you said, though, sometimes films just like stick. They stand out amongst
Yeah.
amongst other films, for better or worse, it seems.
Do you remember the film Carrie that came out with Sissy Spacek? I know they've remade it since then.
I do remember the film, but I think I've only saw it in like bits and pieces though, but not all the way through. But for overall though, I do remember like the overall story of that film.
Yeah. At the end, when that girl's there and the hand reaches out and grabs her and starts pulling her through the ground, that's just one of the scariest things I've ever seen in a movie. Just absolutely, because it's unexpected.
Now, when did kind of classic horror or classic movies in general, I guess I'll say, like, when did this kind of sort of catch your interest? I mean, of course, ultimately now you do a whole podcast where you review classic movies. So just classic movies and cinema in general is just like, how do they sort of found their way into your life?
Well, I'd watched them all my life with my father, and I didn't realize they were classic films. And a lot of times I'd watch a movie and go, oh, I know that movie, this and this happened. But when I first got out of the Army in '83, I signed up for college, and Halloween rolled around, and they showed two movies on the side of the stadium. And it was an outdoor thing, and they showed Casablanca and Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I've just dove in from right there, And then when it came time to start a podcast, because we were doing the one at work, but I wanted to try one at home, and I'm like, well, there's a lot of people that do it, but that's what I know the most about, rather than trying to teach database in a podcast, So it's probably been, at least since the '80s, since the early '80s, I've been heavily involved.
Do you recall, again, reverting back to horror cinema here, do you recall like your first classic horror film that you watched?
Oh, well, see, back in the day when we were latchkey kids and we would come home from elementary at 2:30, and the older kids didn't come home for another hour, and they had an afternoon movie show. And that's where I first saw the original Dracula, the Wolfman, the Gill Man, and all those monster movies when I was a little kid. I watched all that stuff.
Yeah. So really quickly, since we brought up Dracula a couple of times, I sort of want to break this film down a little bit, because you actually loaned me a copy of Dracula back when you and I were doing archaeology together. And, it's just, and of course, like so many people, when they think of Dracula, like in cinema, like, because Dracula has been portrayed by so many actors now up to this point. There's been so many like spin-offs and remakes and, other like sort of things that feature Dracula in film played by different actors. But I think like Bela Lugosi is probably like the one that kind of comes to mind the most, again, because he was like the first to do it, right? So I think it's just that image of him in the cape, in the outfit, and speaking in the film. I think it just really kind of stands the test of time, where it's just like who played the best Dracula? Well, Bela Lugosi, obviously.
I agree with you 100%. Bela Lugosi is the best Dracula ever, and I think that what's his name, Carradine. It's not John Carradine, but the dad of the Kung Fu guy. He was to me, the second best one. I'll look him up real quick. There's a really interesting Dracula came out in Dracula came out in 31, but in about 22 they had released Nosferatu, and these German company just took the story and ripped them off, and so Stoker's widow sued him. And just stop me if you know any of this, if you already know all this. Stoker's widow sued him, and part of the suit was all the copies of that 22 Nosferatu film were supposed to be destroyed, and they didn't get destroyed. So that was the first one. And even when they did What We Do in the Shadows, I don't know if you ever watched that TV show.
I know of it, yeah.
They had a Nosferatu-style vampire living in the house as a kind of a tribute to that Max Schreck vampire. But I definitely agree that Bela Lugosi's the best. And why can't I get this game?
So that actually almost happened with Nosferatu, that almost all traces of it was almost eliminated at one point in time?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
They were ordered to, and they just didn't do it. Okay. John Carradine was so there's that Nosferatu, and then there's a remake coming out later this year at Christmas time of Nosferatu.
Right.
And they Willem Dafoe in the 80s made another movie about the making of Nosferatu. And the way they did it, the producer or director got a real vampire and was using a real vampire to film the movie.
Was this the film Shadow of the Vampire?
Shadow of the Vampire.
Okay, yeah, that I have not seen yet myself. But that's what I thought it looked like. Because I mean, I've seen like trailers and TV spots for it, and that's what it looked like as well. Yeah, because so Nosferatu came out in 22, and then Dracula came out in 31, and
31.
And also it was an interesting change up that I had learned once I was watching the first Dracula. Come to find out that there was a Spanish production company that actually made its own version of Dracula. But and I think, didn't you mention to me that they did it at different times of the day, one at night, one during the day, so there was better lighting in one versus the other or something?
The Spanish filmed at night, and it's much more theatric. The way they move is so much better than the original Dracula. I call the original Dracula, the English Dracula. But they're just more cinematic movements. It's kind of hard to explain, but can't understand a word they're saying, though.
Yeah, it's I don't think I watched the whole Spanish film. I mean, I did look into it, and then visually, like you said, it was a better movie. Visually, it just seemed like it was more clean. I guess I'll say is probably one of the best ways I can describe it.
Yeah, one scene in the English Dracula, the coffin lid started opening, and then the next cut is a jump cut, and Dracula standing there beside the coffin. In the Spanish, when they did drifted the whole thing, and so they had the advantage being at night because they could talk to the text, what worked, what did you do, and they could get feedback before they started their work for the night.
Gotcha.
It was a really good situation.
Yeah, that I did find that to be quite interesting. And then also, I think that particular instance with it being at night and in the dark, it seemed like, if I'm trying to remember, the technique uplighting, I think is what it's called, where they like to bring a lot of light coming from the floor upward to kind of sort of highlight the monsters from the bottom, not too dissimilar from how someone would hold a flashlight underneath their face if they're telling ghost stories around the campfire. And I guess it's just that contrast just made the monsters more scary, I guess I'll say. Would that be around this time when that technique was being used? I'm referring to
the uplighting technique.
Yeah,
because I lost you for just a second again too. I think my internet. I think we're getting ready for getting kind of funky here. So yeah, the uplighting technique. That's and then they later on, it's where you light something like that with one strong light from the bottom. It's chiaroscuro, which is
chiaroscuro.
Chiaroscuro, yeah, and that's the strong light where you just do it with one. That's from the Renaissance. That technique of, for paintings, and then they later took it into a lot of these horror films. But they got a lot of those techniques of the tilt that they would bring into film noir, and that was already in the horror. The tilt, the quick cuts, the jerky action came out of the neo-realism of the Germans, which was pre-World War II or between the world wars, I guess. When they were making films, they came up with a lot of these techniques. And then as the Jewish diaspora began, because of those Nazis, they ended up in Hollywood and brought those techniques fresh on, from all through the 30s and 40s. And so those techniques were brought over and picked up and introduced.
Gotcha. Yeah. So out of any classics from that area, of course, we just outlined a bunch of different monster movies, especially all the ones by Universal that so many people will know, Dracula, The Mummy, The Wolf Man, and everything like that. Maybe I'm pretty sure Dracula would be the answer to this question, but maybe I'll have you think of something. One, is there any one particular one of those monster movies that maybe kind of you think stands out amongst the rest, as far as maybe to you personally, or maybe had an impact on you? Anything come to mind?
Well, I'm real partial to Frankenstein. It's of the earlier bunch because um, Boris Karloff does an amazing job. Like when the monster is standing there and he sees the skylight for the first time, and he's just like, he's got a ton of makeup, but you can still see his acting coming out. So I really like the original Frankenstein, or not the original Frankenstein, the 30s version of the Frankenstein.
Now, visually, was there how much of a difference was there between the monster in the silent Frankenstein film, which I'm literally just learning about in this conversation,
Yeah.
John? So I don't have a visual reference to in my mind to refer to here, but I think just similar to like how like we described with Bela Lugosi playing Dracula back in 1931, the 30s version of Frankenstein's monster, that's the image of Frankenstein's monster that has stood the test of time longer than any other depiction, just as well too. So, how did so I guess just focusing on just these two here, how did like the would you say 1911 Frankenstein,
1910, I think.
1910,
1910.
and yeah, how did that Frankenstein's monster compare to the one from the 30s?
Oh, he was kind of just like a wild-haired makeup guy. He didn't. This all these monster designs, not so much Dracula, but the Wolfman and Frankenstein came from a fellow named Jack Pierce. And it's like the green skin was to make the tones show up right on the film. They weren't necessarily making a green monster, but it just worked out that way. But Jack Pierce, he invented the heavy boots and the bolts on the neck and all that stuff, and did the square head. So that really came, it started in the 30s, but he was on all the way up through them. The Invisible Man and the Gill Man and all those movies on up. And they had a bunch of, you were talking about the classical Frankenstein, what we believe Frankenstein. If you ask anybody to imitate Frankenstein, they'll stick their arms out straight in front of.
Right.
Well, I reviewed all those movies going up in sequence, the Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and all those ones. And in the movie before he walks into town with his arms stretched out like that, he goes blind in the previous movie. And so when they started shooting the monster, and when they started shooting it, he was supposed to be coming into town blind, feeling his way through, but they just didn't mention anything about it. They never made him blind in the next movie, but they shot it like he was blind. And so we all imitate the blind monster and don't even know why.
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea about that. But yes, I mean, I certainly do know that image you're talking about of Frankenstein's monster walking with its arms out. And same thing with the mummy, too. I think like anytime I see the mummy depicted, it's almost in a similar way, arms straight out and then, lanky and bony and then, trying to reach you and grab you and everything like that. And anytime I've ever played any video games as a kid, if there is like a mummy monster that I have to fight in a video game, same stance, like say it's like arms out coming at you and you got to like, I don't know, hit it with your sword or whatever game you might be playing. But again, it just kind of just goes to show just like how influential, these films and especially these creature films have been like for pop culture, since then.
Yeah, they absolutely. And just so much. I mean, like following the Dracula, the 30, what did I say? 32 Dracula.
31 was it when it came out?
31 Dracula. Of course, can't remember, Oh man, I can't remember dates.
So many dates 31. Out there too.
31. 5 years after, they made a sequel to this Dracula called Dracula's Daughter. And it picks up right in Carfax Abbey, right after Van Helsing has killed Dracula. And that's where it picks up. And his daughter comes to town because she thinks she can break the curse on herself now. It's really good. And I mean, this woman, it was the actress was named Gloria Holden, and the producer picked that name as a name for William Holden after seeing that movie. After seeing Gloria Holden, he goes, "This is what I'm going to name this new actor, William Holden." So yeah, it just slices through our culture like nobody's business.
And then, of course, since then, you also mentioned that there was a lot of crossovers between like the different monsters. Like, you mentioned Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, but were there others as well, like other crossovers?
Yeah, there's a whole list of them. I mean, there's at least five mummy ones that come out: the Ghost of the Mummy, the Tomb of the Mummy, the Return of the Mummy, and they just go on. And they have the same thing: the uh, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
That sounds right.
They,
Yeah.
they have just various combinations. They had one, I forget the name of it right off the bat, but Lon Chaney was going to play the werewolf and Frankenstein monster, but he injured his leg and had to cast it out to somebody else. And so, I mean, there's a lot of different variations because after the Wolfman came out, which I know is later, he went on these searches to try and cure himself, and he would run into somebody that was working on Frankenstein's monster using Dracula's blood, and then he comes for help, and then they would just mix them all up. So there's so many variations of it, you know.
Gotcha. Yeah. You know, like I said, like obviously that's a very iconic universe that was created with those series of films back then. And then of course, unfortunately, you know, even though try as they might to revive that series here in the modern day, when with 2017, so I'm jumping forward a little bit. 2017 with The Mummy starring Tom Cruise. Unfortunately, it didn't land to the point where they were able to bring back that dark universe, as they were going to call it. That like the project was unfortunately stopped after the release of the Mummy,
because it was so bad. You know, that Tom Cruise Mummy was just terrible, unwatchable to me. But yeah, when they walked through the lab, they had a gill man, a creature, creature of the Black Lagoon, Gilman hand in there, and there was something else. There was another skeleton that represented one of them.
There was a vampire skull in one of them, if I remember. Yeah.
Okay. And so they just, I don't know, they just didn't pick a good launch vehicle, or they didn't write a good script to launch that series, because it could have been huge.
Well, I think my biggest gripe with the film, I mean, I'm a fan of Tom Cruise and like all the work that he's done. However, I felt like with this supposed to be like coming from a horror genre like that we all remember, I felt like there was too much comedic relief that was kind of like thrown in there that was just sort of just silly for lack of better terms. Because I was expecting a more like gripping, perhaps even terrifying film to a certain degree as well. You know, an actual horror film where it was an action movie that tried to be funny with using horror elements, if that makes sense. So I think that's where it kind of lost me as I was watching it.
Well, there's some logic flaws too, about bringing his friend back to life. He could have done. They made some choices like that. I don't like to see military people running around looting. That kind of put me off right out of the bat. I mean, it's not like when you're in the military, you get to just run off and do what you want, so.
Yeah, I feel like that was kind of sort of a thing for me. It's like, wait, so they were supposed to be on a reconnaissance mission, but it's just the two of them, and then yet they end up way, 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 way over there, and yet somehow they're able to get an airstrike to them in like a matter of minutes. So, it just that was a bit of a stretch for me too, and I had high hopes for the film, and I saw it in. I can't remember like what it was. It was something box, but the experience was you sit in this chair that actually is supposed to like move with the film. And I think it was like D-Box or something like that. I haven't been to any other cinema that had featured this technology since then, but the seat would move with the film. And I thought that was kind of cool, but yeah, it's just like overall, I can't say that I really enjoyed the film so much. It was like one of those where, all right, I watched it. I leave the theater. I kind of forget about it, until like until like it comes up in a conversation somehow or whatever. But yeah, but unfortunately, yeah, because I would have loved to have seen like all these monsters being brought back to life, like in the modern day. But I don't know. Do you think it could still happen or what?
I don't know. It'd be really hard, because everybody wants these, King Kongs versus Mech King Kong versus Godzilla in the metaverse, where you can just make up whatever story you want. To me, I'm real critical of anything that has a metaverse because it's lazy writing.
Mm.
You get yourself boxed in writing, and then you just flip them to another version of the universe, and it all works out. So I don't know. People are more interested in seeing things blow up now than getting a story. I watched, I guess it's classic monster. I watched the Godzilla -1. I don't know if you saw that one.
Not yet, but I feel like I really should have by now because I heard it was really good.
It is really good. It's just you actually cared about the people in the story. I mean, they took the time to construct stuff that worked and made them all interesting. And I really enjoyed that movie. I think it'll be a classic one day when these other ones, when this Tom Cruise mummy's long forgotten.
So, but like, didn't Godzilla -1, wasn't it like the first Godzilla film where an Oscar was awarded or something like that? Did I read that correctly? Maybe. I'm not. I'm not sure exactly, but I do remember that it got a lot of really good reviews from both critics and audience alike. And now the story for that film, though, that was like set like right after World War II, like when Japan was pretty much like after the bombings and everything like that, right?
Exactly. And the main character, I won't spoil anything because it's in the very beginning, but he was a failed kamikaze pilot. So he had that whole shame, thing going for him. And so it was just, I mean, I think they made it for $15 million. Just some ungodly, that's less than we pay one actor. Oh,
yeah. And then it did so well. Now, so speaking of monster movies, like before we move on to a different topic here, so let's say if a studio were to take a crack at trying to resurrect one of these classic monsters to make it into a modern movie, which one would you think would have like the best chance of maybe like being well received upon release?
That's tough. They've made so many, like you said, they made so many Draculas. There's so many Frankensteins. They've tried a different version of the Invisible Man a few times,
and the Wolfman just as well too.
Yeah, a lot of Wolfman. And that just, if you look at the universe, there's not a lot left other than you get out to the Gill Man or the Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I enjoyed it, and it could be done with with the underwater and everything. So that's what I would put my money on. They tried to launch the Tom Cruise. I guess it had been 20 years, but they tried to launch the Tom Cruise mummy. But that Brendan Fraser mummy was pretty good.
It was, yes.
And I guess it had been almost 20 years, another one that was just the Invisible Man would be really hard to do, but that is the classic monster movie that has the highest kill or body count of all of them because he runs a train off. He derails a train and kills like 400 people.
Oh, wow.
So he beats all the other monsters hands down. So yeah, I would say definitely Gilman on that. Come out. What about you? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I feel like with Gilman and bringing back the Creature from the Black Lagoon, I feel like when you're dealing with monsters or any sort of like creature for that matter that emerges from the water, I feel like that kind of sort of brings like an extra depth of horror to it because, like the water, especially you can't see like what's underneath there in those swampy areas. So it's just like, you don't know where like the monster is, where I feel like with some of the other monsters, it's maybe a little bit more straightforward since they're just strictly terrestrial creatures, with maybe the exception of Dracula, who can turn into a bat and fly, of course. But I feel like, yeah, it's just like when you're talking about water and getting pulled in the water where you can't breathe and escape becomes futile. It's like, I feel like that's like an element that makes it very, very scary. Because I feel like it would be hard to throw comedic relief into a film like that when you have a creature like Gilman that can swim underwater really fast and attack from like you don't know where,
Right, he can pop up anywhere. Now, and it's also a sympathetic monster too, because he was the last of his kind and he was alone. He just wanted what was it? Adams was her last name. He's in the boy bathing suit. He just wanted a girlfriend, He's not a bad guy. So I always think that's why the original Wolfman worked so good, because not Lon Chaney, Lon Chaney Jr. was very sympathetic. You felt for Larry because he didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't a vampire. He wasn't a hardened killer. He just happened to get bit by Bella the Gypsy, which was played by Bela Lugosi.
Right. Yeah. So, now, when it comes, you just made me think of something when you brought up Godzilla minus one's budget, $15 million, and then obviously becoming like a big success out of that too. It makes me think of the first Halloween movie, we're kind of sort of fast forwarding a little bit in our classics here to 1978 here, excuse me, and I had recently learned that the budget for that film, I think it was like 300,000, but then it grossed like, I think 200 million or something like that.
Incredible.
Which was like, I could be wrong on that though, but I know that its box office return made it one of like the highest grossing like independent films of all time. And then of course, like it created like its own universe as a result of that too. There's been like multiple timelines and film lines from Halloween. Of course, like you had like Halloween like 2, which took place right after that, and then there was like the Halloween 3, which I guess wasn't with Michael Myers. It was like an anthology movie, like just something else. Season of the Witch, entirely differently. But then you had like Halloween 4 and 5, which brought Michael Myers back, and then you had like Halloween H2O, which which actually I think was the first Halloween film that I actually watched, and it actually scared me. It made Michael Myers like one of my most feared slashers in the genre. Yeah. And then, but then you have, I guess, the Halloween 2018, like 40 years after the original. But I guess like that became its own timeline. But so it's really confusing. I mean, it's hard for me to like pick apart all the films unless if I had a chart in front of me, or if I was even displaying a chart right now. But of course, it all stemmed from just this independent film that turned out to be very, very successful. So it's interesting how, like, again, referring to classics here, how something like that just sticks and just creates so much after it.
Yeah, it's like both of us left out all the zombie movies. Right. And they all grew out of Night of the Living Dead, and there's a million of those things now, TV series and Night of the Comet and all kinds of remakes of it. Zombie's another classic horror character that you can really work with and build a lot on.
Yeah, zombie movies, or zombie, in general. Like my sister, she's very big into that for sure. So yeah, we've definitely gotten into like some zombie stuff, like watching together. And then of course, like the early ones, the way they depict like zombies also like carried over into later films just as well too. Talking about like you got to shoot them in the head, you got to destroy their brains in order to like stop them, and like that's a trope that just stuck just as well too. It's like it seems like no one can think of like any other way how they would want to wove zombies into a film or a TV series where you can kill them in some other way other than like taking out their brains in some sort of way.
Yeah, I've been trying to record with my daughters, and we had to cancel because somebody got a cold or something. But we're working on like vampire movies and the core canon of it, because the movie we were going to do is Near Dark, and it's basically some redneck vampires running around Texas with a mirrored out van with aluminum foil slits that they can see, and we're working on how, is this canon? Is that canon? Where did they make this up, or where did this come from? The only one that's easy on that, I'm going to go back one more time to the Wolfman, 1941. All the werewolf lore comes out of that one movie. It wasn't the first one. They made the Werewolf of London before that, but everything that's the silver, the bullet, the whole bit comes out of the Werewolf 1941. I mean, the Wolfman 1941. And it just made me think of something. We were just in London, right? And I was telling my wife, I got to go down to there's this porn theater in Piccadilly Square or Piccadilly Circus that I need to go see, and She was like, "What, are you crazy or something?" And I'm like, "It was the one in American Werewolf in London. I want to go see where the werewolf, came out, but we couldn't find it. We walked all over looking for that site."
Yeah, and then of course, like with the vampire uh, types of monsters in movies, like they've been there's been so many variants in like so many ways with some like overlap, I would say. I mean, obviously, it seems like the big one that really kind of sticks is stake through the heart or sunlight
Yeah,
as a way to kill them, and like some like the Dusk Till Dawn vampires, if you like make a cross by putting two sticks together, that's enough to repel them like away. And then some vampires aren't repelled by crosses at all or holy water or anything like that. But one and I'm also trying to think, where does the trope with vampires begin where they're not allowed to enter someone's home unless they're invited in? Because I think the earliest depiction of that I can remember is the Lost Boys, which I think was from back in '87, something like that.
yeah.
Do you recall like if that trope has appeared earlier
No,
in any vampire films?
it was definitely in the 31 film. But remember, I don't know if you remember it, but he spent a lot of time out there using his mental powers to get them to open the doors and come out on the balcony and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes way back. But I was going to tell you, Boris Karloff is the character, and I can't recall which one of the movies it is, but he's traveling around with Dracula, and he's got a skeleton with a stake through it, and he pulls the stake out, and Dracula completely reanimates.
Mm.
So, they played with it, like, well, don't pull that stake out, So I always say if I had to kill a vampire, I would stake it, chop its head off, burn it, crucify it, seal it in cement. Just make sure you cover all those tasks.
Actually, so the Lost Boys was like one of the earlier like vampire films that I watched as a kid that actually like genuinely scared me quite a bit. And I think a lot of it has to do with just how compelling Kiefer Sutherland's portrayal was in that film. Like he played such like a wickedly good villain back then. Also, when you think of him in films like Stand By Me, and then of course like in The Lost Boys as well.
Yeah.
But like there was that one scene where and I forget some of the characters' names, but they take the older brother to like the beach or whatever, and then you see his face emerge from the shadows, and he's got like his full vampire face.
Right.
And I just remembered, oh, that was scary. And then all the other guys there, they took their vampire forms as well too. But so that film scared me, but I do remember like garlic, holy water.
Mm-hmm.
The trope of, like I said, of course, not being able to be invited in or not being able to come in unless you're invited. And then it was also like, spoiler alert for like a few decades old movie here. But I think that was also the one, if I remember at the end, where if you killed the lead vampire, the alpha vampire, the other ones like died off too, if I recall.
Yeah. That's not in the original 31 Dracula. I know that. I don't know where it comes in. I saw a movie, and it's been a lifetime quest. I saw it when I was about 15, and they were hippies that lived at the beach, and this head hippie's girlfriend got bitten by a vampire, and he found out that if he killed the head vampire, within 3 days he could get her back. So all through the movie, he tracks the vampire down, and he finally kills it, and his girlfriend just turns to dust.
Oh man!
And so, and he kind of just lets out a scream. But I've never been able to find that movie, any reference to it. It's like one of those things. Did I make that up? But it was truly a real movie. I'll find it one day. So yeah, they play with that lore, of breaking the line because Dracula's daughter, she thought because her father was dead that she would be able to break out. So it's there pretty early on. I read the book, but it's been so many years.
Yeah. And well, what was also interesting about the film is that like it went in line with the book, but it didn't follow like the same format as the book. I mean, because now for anyone who hasn't read the novel Dracula, it's not like a story like a linear story that most people would think of when they read like a novel. Like this one was made up using a collection of like journal entries and letters and stuff like that, like from the characters and everything like that. So like you had Jonathan Harker, like in the first act, that was outlining all the stuff that he was observing once he went to visit Count Dracula at his castle to set up him signing over and buying property in England. And so it was one of those things where in the book, what made it maybe a little bit less scary with that format, in my opinion, is that despite how scary things got with the characters, at least they didn't die because they wrote about it, or they wrote about it in a letter. So, but of course, like they didn't follow that in the 1931 Dracula, but they did kind of sort of follow that format. And fast forwarding a little bit to 1994 with Bram Stoker's Dracula, where Gary Oldman played
right.
Dracula. I do remember that.
Yeah, in that movie, that's another one of those canon. Remember, because he comes out in the middle of that, like, oh, you don't know this, but vampires can go out at daytime too, as long as they wear their sunglasses. And he starts following Winona Ryder around. So what was I going to say about that? I don't know. I lost it. Old age.
But yeah, so it's lots of different tropes to go off of here, and now with Dracula though, it seems like unfortunately he might be kind of losing some steam when in cinema a little bit, because I think it was it just this year or maybe it was last year where they came out with like two films that featured Dracula. One was like a comedy, like what was it, Renfield, and then the other one was the Last Voyage of the Demeter, I think, which I haven't seen either one because I heard that neither one of those were very good. So
the Last Voyage of the Demeter was a dog, an absolute dog, but I watched Renfield and watched it for what it was. It's a Nicolas Cage movie, so I didn't take it too serious. It was kind of funny. Aquafina is kind of funny. So if you don't go in there with too high expectations, it's good to watch for free. But that Last Voyage of the Demeter is not even worth, watching. It's terrible.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Well, like what I've heard, and maybe you could substantiate this if this goes along with what you experienced. But I think a lot of people I guess they didn't like how much it focused on the crew. Like, I guess they tried to give like all the crew members like their own backstories and memories and flashbacks and something like that. And then Dracula was just kind of like this primal force that just sort of existed in the background, almost like they made it more like a monster like movie, almost like The Thing, kind of sort of like how The Thing was just hidden around the Antarctic base. I think they kind of sort of did something similar with Dracula, where he just kind of is stuck in the shadows. Like he doesn't take like a human form or talk or taunt the crew at all. Is that sound about right overall?
Yeah, he's killing, I think, and he's getting stronger till he's returning to his full form. But he does just pop up out of the fog. If you see somebody looking this way, Dracula's going to be right here in a second. So that was kind of that. But they were just like, oh, something's killing all the rats. Oh, something's killing all the dogs. Oh, something killed all the sheep. Hey, you got Dracula on your boat, man. Burn it or something. Swim away. Don't just sit there and complain about it.
Yeah, so that was the movie that I ended up skipping out on because I just heard that it wasn't all that good, and so but those are the two most recent depictions of Dracula in cinema, and so I almost kind of like wonder, it's just like will anyone want to try to use that character again, like in movies in the future?
I don't know, because like going back to Interview with a Vampire and all that, Dracula's supposed to be a sexual character, so there's always that sexual tension, and there's a whole genre of lesbian vampire movies by itself. So so if they want to bring the classic Dracula back, he's got to be that guy. And I don't know if the audiences want that or would enjoy that anymore.
Yeah, that is kind of like hard to say what modern audiences would kind of go for. And I don't know, I feel like in this modern day, it's very hit or miss with films nowadays. Like it seems like some films that supposedly are supposed to carry a lot of hype and have these huge budgets end up flopping. Even like if they're based on very popular franchises. Unfortunately, like with you and I being archaeologists, like the latest Indiana Jones film, like didn't balance out in the box office, and then I guess it's also happened with like a lot of like recent Star Wars releases too. So it's just
Yeah.
like it's one of those things where if like long-standing franchises like that have huge fan bases aren't garnering on people to go watch like what comes out, is like, do we have much hope for these classic monsters
Yeah.
making a comeback just as well?
Hey, it's when, to me, when like these new guys take over these movies and they change the timeline, they change all the canon. Well, I'm not on that journey with them anymore. I'm a big Star Wars fan, but when it's the different Star Wars, I can't follow it. I don't want to be part of that. I want my Luke and Chewbacca and this story to go this way. And so I don't know. Yeah, I can understand why they fell off. And you've got to take people from point A to point B. You're on a train with the movie, and you got to ride it to the end. So you should feel good about it. I interviewed Antonia Bogdanovich, which is she's a director, but her father is more popular director. And that's what she said. She's like dedicated to giving the viewer a good experience, because I was talking about her movie and I said I thought everybody was going to die at that one scene when they were all in the living room, and she's like, "Oh, I wouldn't do that to my audience. I don't want them walking out just like dumbfounded, And so I think they don't take us on a journey. It's like you got to wait 2 more years before you find out why Luke's on an island. They took us from part of a journey,
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess time will
Thank
tell.
you,
We'll
man.
see. Yeah, we'll see if anyone picks up any of these classic monsters. But shifting gears a little bit in this horror genre here, and I know you said that slashers aren't your usual go-to.
Yeah.
It sounds like, but if I could pose the question though, like, would you say that there's any like slasher character out there that, again, like similar to what I asked you earlier about the monsters, like, is there a slasher that you think stands out amongst the rest, like that maybe might have garnered like the most amount of notoriety amongst horror fans?
You keep trying to go forward, and I kind of keep going back. But the Bates Motel, what's that?
Norman Bates?
Psycho, Norman Bates. That was one of the scariest movies ever. They didn't even show the woman bleeding in the shower. They just showed blood running down the drain. So I'm having a hard time pulling up a slasher movie that I've actually watched, because I avoid those things. So probably Psycho's the last quote slasher movie I've ever watched.
Gotcha. So like for me, I mentioned that Michael Myers was one of the early slashers to like really scare me in a film. However, I think, having watched, some of the different slasher movies, especially like the earlier ones as well. Like, of course, I've seen, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween. And then, of course, if you want to fast forward a little bit, when like Ghostface appeared just as well into and Scream back in 1996. Now, for me, I would have to say probably Freddy Krueger might be the scariest, or the one that stands out the most. And I think it's just because, he was a killer that went after his victims when they were in their most vulnerable state, and that was when they were sleeping. And he came at them like in their dreams, and then of course like the dream world wasn't bound by earthly limitations, and he was able to like turn into like hideous creatures and morph his body. Like there was that one scene where he like stretched his arms out really, really long, and he's scratching like these brick walls while he's in the middle of an alley. And so he would just terrorize like, these teenagers in their dreams. And then of course, if he killed them in their dreams and they died like in real life, and then like anyone who saw like the person in the real world, like they would see like all the damage that Freddy inflicted in the dream, they would see it like manifest in the real world too. So I think that's kind of what made him like scary. And then also, he wasn't a silent killer like Michael Myers, like Jason
Yeah.
Voorhees. Like I said, he taunted and terrorized
Right.
his victims. He played with his food, if you will. So I think Freddy Krueger would probably be the slasher that stands out. And yeah, because like Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, they're masked slashers. They don't talk, but they're also very strong and imposing and are very very hard to kill. So they definitely are very formidable slashers in their own rights too. But I just think everything surrounding Freddy Krueger I think makes him the one that stands out the most in my opinion.
That sounds right because it's just like what you said a while ago about being in the water, terrorized because you can't see. Same as a dream, you can't control it. But I did think of one off the wall thought when that Air Jordan movie came out, the Michael Jordan movie. They went to Toonland.
Oh, Space Jam.
Space Jam.
Yeah.
When they found out late in the movie, like, oh, they can stretch their arms, I can stretch my arms too. So I wonder if nobody in Freddy Krueger's, when Freddy can do wild stuff in the dream world, they could probably do wild stuff too to counter him,
Well,
but didn't know it.
it's funny that you mentioned that because that actually does happen in the third
Oh,
film. Yeah, it's the third film is called Dream Warriors, and yeah, like so a group of kids they kind of like band together and they try to like fall asleep at the same time, and each one of them is able to create like their own unique abilities like in the dream state to try to fight against
okay.
Freddy. Like one of them like takes like this wizard form and stuff like that, and like one is like jumping up really high in the air and doing front flips and stuff like that. So I think, so Dream Warriors was like the movie in which,
Okay.
they did that. But there was also like there was a lot of gruesome scenery like in that film as well. It's kind of funny. So you and I, we were talking about our military experiences, right? Well, I did meet a Marine, a drill instructor actually, who had this tattoo. Now, there's a particular scene in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 where Freddy Krueger is controlling like this patient at this hospital with like the veins from like their arms, like a marionette kind of sorta, and ends up like edging them to like this window and throws them like off of it, and he falls to his death. And so this drill instructor that I met, he had a tattoo of Freddy Krueger's clawed hand, but it was recruits at the bottom of it. So, but like I said, a lot of gruesome imagery in those films. Like, yeah, Wes Craven had quite the imagination, I'd say.
Yeah, the pinhead. He did the pinhead, right?
I'm not sure, but that's a good question. But yeah, like Hellraiser, man,
Yeah,
that was a gruesome
yeah.
film series too.
And I was like, yeah, that's just not my thing. I don't know. I've just never picked up. I don't mind seeing blood and gore in a movie, but I don't know why I don't like to see those guys for some reason.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. Now, I think the last sort of sub horror genre that I sort of want to talk about here is, I guess I'll say, comedy horror or horror comedy, one or the other. And the first movie that comes to mind when I think of this is Ghostbusters.
Oh, great movie.
Yeah, so like, outstanding film, and it holds up so well, like even to this day. Like, yeah, I can like pick up that film and watch it at any time and just enjoy it for sure.
That's a great movie. We finally just watched those other ones. We never watched the female Ghostbuster, but we watched the one where they were on the farm, and then
Hmm.
the Frozen universe. The farm one was a pretty good movie, pretty a decent movie. I mean, the Frozen universe was okay, but the one before it was a little better. I don't
Yeah,
know if you've seen them.
well, I saw like the one that took place in Colorado or wherever it
Yeah,
was, like out west. Yes, I haven't seen the Frozen Empire one. That I guess they go back to New York for
right.
whatever reason or something like that. And then and of course they did really well with God, I can't think of the actor's name, who unfortunately is not with us anymore. The guy that played Egon, he had passed.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Harold Ramis. Harold
Yes.
Ramis.
Yeah, Harold Ramis. Why couldn't I think of his name? But I mean, but obviously, like he only had Egon only had appearance at the beginning of the film.
Right.
And then, of course, they CGI'd him as a ghost towards like the end. And again, spoiler, I should have said spoiler alert there a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, the original Ghostbusters though, that was just like incredible. And then also like I watched it first when I was a kid, and then of course I was just more or less taken by the visuals, and with them having their blasters and trying to trap like Slimer and everything. But I think like later on, once I actually was listening to what they were saying and the scientific stuff they were trying to do, and then of course the storyline with Gozer in the alternate dimension, it's like, man, this is actually like a very, very good like story laid out. It's written well and everything like that. And of course, like every single actor, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, they were all amazing. So yeah, like I'm curious. I'm going to pull that up on Rotten Tomatoes here really quick. I'm curious like what that got overall as a score.
The regular Ghostbuster movie.
Yeah.
The and they kept the story. They kept the story going the whole time. The Ghostbusters.
Yeah, let's see.
Ghostbusters.
Okay,
I guess Ivan Reitman's.
So 95% amongst critics, 88% amongst audience, and that is over 250,000 audience reviews, 81%. Yeah. So it did really well overall.
Yeah, it's a good movie. Just thinking of that same bunch in Stripes. It's not a horror movie. Sergeant Hulk, I guess, is a Hulk.
Yeah. So let's see. I'm trying to think. Other comedy horror movies that I can think of too, aside from that one. Shoot. I mean, I probably should have maybe thought of some more titles before I brought up this topic. But
that's like Renfield. That's why I said it's kind of acceptable if you just realize what it is and don't try to put too much into it.
Right. And then of course, but I think like horror tropes that are supposed to be more funny, I think more often than not, I think are geared more towards being like family films, like with, like the Hotel Transylvania series and stuff like that. So, but I guess, yeah, overall though, it's just like comedy and horror are quite different genres for the most part. Yeah. So it's just, I guess like, maybe maybe it's tricky to blend the two. I'm not sure.
I mean,
but
you got I don't know if you remember the George Hamilton Love at First Bite, where he's Dracula, and of course, and he gets thrown out of his castle by the Communist Party of Romania because they want to use it to train gymnasts. And he goes to New York and he doesn't fit in, and it's a hilarious movie. And I guess they made one with Jim Carrey about the same time, where Lauren Hutton is trying to turn him into a vampire.
I'm not familiar with that one. I'm trying to remember Jim Carrey in a movie that features vampires.
Yeah, I think it's and then they have the what's the one? Buffy the Vampire Slayer is like comedy. Let's see.
Actually, yeah, you're right. And then yeah, because I do remember some of Rutger Hauer's one-liners in that film, like, and then also the guy that plays Pee Wee Herman, he was one of the vampires in there, right?
Yeah, he did that incredible death scene where he just went on and on. He was stabbed, but he kept kicking, and he wouldn't die, and he'd fall over, and then he'd get back up and start kicking around. Yeah, it's really funny.
Or he lost his arm, and then he's just like, man, you ruined my new jacket. Guys, kill him a lot or something like that.
Yeah, so that was his comeback tour, right?
It might have been. I mean, well, like comeback tour, like what do you mean? Like come back from like Pee Wee Herman or what?
Well, no, he lost that Pee Wee Herman job because he got caught in a porno theater down there in
I didn't know about that.
Florida. Yeah, and so they're like, you can't have a kids show. And so he was kind of outcast for a while, but he made it back before he died,
Gotcha.
Okay. Try to rehab it. I'm going to just look real quick and try if I can find this.
Let's see. I'm trying to think of like, is there any other?
That one's called Once Bitten.
Once Bitten. That sounds familiar.
10% on Rotten Tomatoes.
10%.
Yeah. So not your great movie there. Oh, Teen Wolf. There's more popped up here when I did that. Did you what about Fright Night? How do you feel about that one?
Fright Night was pretty good. That one was also very, very scary. And the
Uh,
actor's name again, because we mentioned him in The Princess Bride. You even
Chris Sarandon.
yeah, and again, like when he took his vampire form face and everything like that,
Yeah.
that was very, very terrifying. And then of course, like all the other like people that had gone missing that ultimately turned out to be vampires, like underneath his house and everything like that
Yeah.
too. Yeah, that was scary.
The scariest part of that movie is when he's walking and he's going down the banister and he's chipping the paint off with his fingernail as he
Mm.
walks. Yeah, that's a good movie. So, it tries to have a little humor in it too, but it's still a pretty solid vampire movie.
Yeah.
And then they remade that, and then there's a new Salem's Lot coming out on like Netflix or something.
That's right. Yes, and I did also see the remake for Fright Night, and then that one Colin Farrell played the lead
Yeah,
vampire, and
right.
then and I'm trying to remember the lead actor's name, who another actor who unfortunately isn't with us. Why can't I think of his name? But yeah, but that was a pretty good film too, I thought, for the most part, as
Yeah.
well. And now Salem's Lot, I don't think I've seen the original Salem's Lot. That was a movie from the 80s, if I recall. Maybe.
Yes, yes, off a super popular Stephen King book, and the movie, couldn't live up to the book like most of them.
Right.
You had talked about crosses working sometimes and not working other times. There's one part in the book where the priest is holding up the cross and the vampire's got the boy by the neck, and he goes, "I'll let the boy go if you'll put down that cross." And the priest goes, "Okay." He lets the boy go, but the priest won't drop the cross. And the vampire walks up and just snaps the arms off of it and says, "It's not the cross, it's the faith." And before he kills the guy. And I thought that was the scariest thing ever.
That does sound scary, and it's also very taunting too
Yeah.
to say to the priest in that moment. Now I haven't read Salem's Lot, but it did come up in a podcast that I listened to once, and I think the host like brought up this point about how what made like the Salem's Lot vampires like really, really scary. And I don't know how well this carried over into the movie necessarily, but I think it was like, vampires were slowly like kind of taking over this small town in Maine because at this point, like people have sort of forgotten about vampires or weren't even thinking about the possibility of vampires there. So even though like there was all these strange occurrences and everything like that happening within the town, vampire never came to the mind of the people that's what might actually be causing it. So I think that's actually kind of how like they slowly infiltrated and started taking over this town because of, people just for more or less forgetting. Am I on the right track there? Does that sound about right?
You are. That's why I went from the town was named Jerusalem Lot and Jerusalem's Lot, and that's why it became Salem's Lot as it became so bad.
Mm.
I'm looking for a movie. It was made for TV, Gargoyles movie, 1972, and they have in that one that the incubation period for the gargoyle eggs is 500 years, and that's enough time for humans to forget. That's why there's pictures of gargoyles on middle age or churches and buildings and stuff, but then they had forgotten. So every 500 years they hatch and try to take over again. So they kind of built that in institutionally.
What was the name of that film?
Gargoyles, 1972, made for TV. It was a CBS Tuesday night movie, and it's just great. When I did the review of it, and there's one lady, Grayson Hall. I don't know if you know her, but she was one of the main characters on Dark Shadows, the television soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
And her death, like I had like 10 people like, that was the scariest thing I ever saw when I was a kid. I'll never forget that death scene of Grayson Hall. And it really stuck with them. So it's a good movie. The guy's an anthropologist, of course, too. So
right on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually there's a few Stephen King film adaptations that I've seen bits and pieces of, but I haven't watched all the way through. And this might shock some people, but like I haven't actually watched like the entire miniseries of The Stand yet. And which I don't know, would you like Stephen King has an interesting mix. I mean, he has like some fantasy books. I think his Dark Tower
Yeah.
series is like predominantly like a fantasy realm type sort of thing, maybe not necessarily entirely horror. So I'm not sure if like The Stand was considered a horror movie, but I know it's one of his most iconic works is
Yeah.
The Stand. But then of course I also do remember watching it back in the day, you know, where Tim Curry played Pennywise and did like an amazing job. Like that was another performance that scared me when I watched it as a kid. Was Pennywise in 1994 in it.
See, I've never watched it. I know what it is, you know, I know all about the character, but just never bothered to watch it. See, you said something about watching what it reminded me of another movie, but I forgot what it is because I'm getting, you know, late night. You know, I get that sundown thing. But yeah, so it's a scary looking creature too. I tell you, you know, like every time the Tim Curry face and of the monster, that's pretty scary. So yeah, I think the last one I watched was one of the Exorcist sequels.
Mm.
Last one of the real scary movie that I watched. Well, we were up at Shiloh, and we went into town to watch it at the theater, and I was like, "No, what did I do that for?" Yeah,
Yeah, scary stuff. All right, so John, throughout this conversation, you know, we went like back and forth across time
right.
quite a bit. We brought up a lot of different titles, and you know, we created quite the list. I would say overall, but you know, as we now are in spooky season, when this episode is going to go live, if you could just say start off, I say, and recommend like a movie to start with to our listeners and our viewers, which one do you think they ought to start with?
I would start with the original Mummy, the 32 Mummy with Boris Karloff. That's to me the best acting, the best makeup, the best story. I would go right there. If it was more modern, I would go with Love at First Bite. It's a real crack up comedy. Like I said, Fright Night is really good. Coming up, you know, I'm trying to come forward in time. I'm trying not to hang out in the bath too far in the back. But Fright Night is really good. So that's you know, about as far as I want to go. But those are some good ones. Get you going on the classics.
All right, right on. All right, well, John, well, as we kind of start winding down here, we just passed an hour here. So I got a couple of final standard questions that I like to ask all my guests at the end of the show. So these will be a little bit different from what we've been talking about. But like I said, every guest gets asked these. So, of course, you will as well. And the first thing that I like to ask my guests to do is to issue a challenge to our listeners. And, you know, we didn't get to talk very much about like, you know, your time in the military or throughout your long time working as an archaeologist, that profession you are now retired from. Maybe we'll probably catch that in another episode, a follow up. But what I want to ask you is what challenge would you issue to our listeners and our viewers today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
Well, the best thing I can say looking back is don't wait. Do it now. You know I'm a photographer, so I know when I see a photograph I want to take, a picture I want to take, I take it then. I don't say I'm going to get it when we come back outside. And you should approach life more like that because it's going fast at all ages, all phases. So just get out there and do it. If you want to go to see Dracula's castle in Romania, go see Dracula's castle in Romania and don't make excuses to not go see it. That'd be my advice.
Right on. And speaking of which, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I'm actually heading to Romania next month, and Dracula's Castle is on the itinerary. So
awesome, man!
So
awesome.
Stand by for photos on that one for sure. Yeah. I plan on taking many.
I made it to Stonehenge finally. You know, after all this time.
Yeah. Yeah, because you like how long were you in England for when you were there?
We were there 8 days. Eight
Okay.
days. We had a lot. We went and it was raining sideways when we were at Stonehenge. It was so fun.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully someone told you that it rains a lot in the UK, so it
Yeah,
certainly does. All right, right on, and I think that's a first to come up on the podcast, John. I mean, but that is a very good point because I do think that there are a lot of people like out there that are probably waiting for the right time to do something.
exactly.
Like they'll be like, once I have this, then I'll go do that or whatever the case may be. But I'm like, the stars are never going to align perfectly for you to go out and do what you want to do. So just go out and do what you want to do. So
Yeah, have a good time.
right on. All right. So what I have next for you, John, is my final three. And again, these are three, I like to think that they're fun questions that I ask all my guests at the end of the show. So, and like I said, you're going to get asked these as well. And the first of these three questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
When we went to France last year for our 32nd anniversary or something like that,
Oh, wow.
some ungodly number like that, we went to a place called Saint Michel, and it's an island that is flooded out by tidal, and there's been a fortress or an abbey built there for 1,000 years. And we went
Wow.
and we walked all the medieval streets. We took the tour and went all the way to the top, and it's just beautiful. It's just a giant castle on a little island out in the water. And so that Saint Michel was it. I got to visit Normandy, that was powerful, and the cemetery over there. But Saint Michel was definitely the best. Everything about France was bigger and better than I thought it was going to be.
I know. I think I know the castle that you're talking about there. And yes, I've seen photos and
Yeah,
my goodness.
you can
Wow.
actually rent a room there if you want to pay for it. Stay
Mm,
there, and the on high tides it's completely cut. I mean, there's a bridge, but it's surrounded by water.
hmm
So yeah, it's just really nice.
Oh, that sounds amazing, and a perfect spot for an archaeologist to go
Mm-hmm.
travel to, just as well.
Exactly.
All right, awesome. All right, so my next question in this final three: what is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
That's I've let me stumble on that one. On my bucket list, it's getting done. It's getting done. So there's less things on there. I would like to go to Australia.
Hmm.
I'd like to make it there, but don't see it happening because flying to England, it's like you could just beat me with baseball sticks and baseball bats the whole time. I come out of the plane like, oh my god. So, but yeah, Australia, just to see it, see Ayers Rock, and be those things down there.
Yeah,
Would be,
that's a long time in the plane because
yeah,
I flew from Seattle to Osaka, Japan once. That was 15 hours in that damn plane. So
that's a
it's quite the haul.
that's a big ocean, right? Yeah.
All right, but yeah, Australia, right on. And the last of these three questions, and this is a two-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Of course, dogs are my favorite animal, but animals that are out in the wild. Um, well, this is going to be a surprise to you. I have not seen them out in the wild, but kangaroos. I'm pretty impressed with them. Lately, I've been seeing these flex kangaroo pictures where these kangaroos are buff. They're more than any bodybuilder I've ever seen. They're monsters. So I'd like to see one of those out in the wild hopping around.
I think that's a first for the podcast, John. If someone else had mentioned, I feel like I would remember it if someone had mentioned kangaroos in the podcast. But since I can't remember that, I'd say that's a first. Yeah, to come up on the podcast for this question. So, kangaroos, we got it. So right on.
Kangaroos, tough guys.
All right, John. Well, that's it. That's all the questions that I have for you tonight. But before we call it a day here, let's talk about really quick, how our listeners and viewers can connect with you. Like I said, you are the host of the Classic Movie Reviews podcast, and I know you got some other things that you're doing like out there in the internet space. You got a couple of books and things along those lines just as well too. So yeah, tell us a little bit about where we can find you and where we can find your stuff.
Well, the easiest way is classicmovierev.com. That's the website, and you'll have access to YouTube, all the stuff, my books that I have for sale. And you mentioned something earlier about how Dracula's book was put together, and you tell me what you think of this idea. I would like to do an archaeological story designed as a field book with sketches and, like Shannon's making me so mad I can't stand it. Tell the story in a field book. But it's an idea. But yeah, so classicmovierev.com, and you can get access to everything. I've been everything for the last 20 episodes or so. I've been putting YouTube videos up. So I'm making a big push into YouTube right now.
All righty. And I'll get everything linked up in the show notes for this episode. Or if we have viewers who are watching us talk on YouTube, it'll be down in the description below. They can go click away and find everything. And like I said, another reminder to our listeners and viewers, if you want to see the first collaboration that John and I did a few years back, where we reviewed the movie The Princess Bride, you can find that out there on YouTube, and I'll link that up in the show notes as well. All right. Well, John, I want to thank you very much for taking the time for joining me today. It's great to catch up with you again. It's like I said, it's definitely been a while, but of course, I just had a lot of fun just taking this dive and talking about all things horror cinema with you tonight. I definitely have a list myself of stuff to go and review and catch up on. So, but you gave me some good places to start. So, thank you very much for joining me tonight and sharing your stories and insights with myself and the listeners. It's been great, sir.
Thank you, Josh. I had a great time. And remember, you have an open invitation to come on my show anytime you want. So if you got a movie you want to do, hit me up and we'll get it done.
All right. Well, I'll certainly think of something for sure, my friend.
Okay.
All right. Right on.